All right, and welcome back to the BettingPros podcast. We are under 1 month away from the NFL regular season kicking off. So today we'll be breaking down how to build your own sports betting model for the NFL. My name is Seth Woolcock, and today we'll be tapping into the big brain of our data scientist here at Fantasy Pros, Sam Hoppen. Sam, what's hopping today, man? I know you're just back from doing some world traveling over the weekend.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm doing great. Excited to dust off some of the podcasting cobwebs, if you will. It's been a little while since I've been on the recording side of things. So happy to be here. Excited to, I think we're almost exactly a month away from the first NFL regular season game. So getting prepped for that and excited to get back into it.
Yeah, glad we could break you out from your laboratory and bring you here front and center for the great people on the Betting Pros podcast. I want to start by talking about the basics of sports betting modeling, Sam. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your inner nerd and what you got you into creating your own sports betting models, man?
Yeah, of course. So I've been sort of doing this for a couple of years now and have a non-traditional background, like a lot of people did. Studied marketing in undergrad, but then went back to get my master's in data science. So learned a lot of what I use in that program. Finished that up a couple of years ago and have been doing a variety of sports. I joined BettingPros last year, but I've been doing some NFL stuff for them, also focusing on the NBA and WNBA, and previously had done some work on Formula One models as well.
Sick. You're doing the Lord's work out here at Betting Pros and Fantasy Pros, so we appreciate that, man. What exactly, from an elementary perspective, is a sports betting model, and what makes it useful for sports bettors, would you say?
Yeah, it can really mean a lot of things, right? It can be your classic regression or classification model predicting,
sure,
sort of who will win the game, how many rushing yards a player is going to have. But there are some other techniques you can use as well, just using some sampling, which is at a high level taking games with similar characteristics and calculating different betting derivatives based on that sample. I think you can also create mental models as well. Sports betting is as much of an art as it is a science. And so one thing I've been working on recently is coming up with my own NFL team rating. So I'm going and grading each unit within a team, applying a specific weight to it, and then creating a final team grade, which I then convert into a projected spread against sort of a neutral team. So it's not, a regression model or anything like that. I'm using my domain knowledge, some other sources of information, historical data, things like that, but using it to create an output that can eventually be used for handicapping games.
Okay. And Sam, there's a lot of different variables that go into sports betting. In your model, how do you decide what do you put in, what do you throw out? What kind of brings that good bowl of stew all together for you?
It's a couple of things. Obviously, the most important thing if you are building a linear regression or a classification model is doing exploratory data analysis. So understanding sort of the shape of the data you're working with, its characteristics, all that sort of stuff, seeing what, again, correlates with your target variable. Doing all of that is crucial in understanding, again, what's going to contribute to the results of your model at the end. And then another part of it too is just domain knowledge and knowing, when certain data points are going to be a little bit off, or, if you're coming up with interaction variables, understanding how those work together as well is huge. And you get that from having domain knowledge in whatever sport you're working on. So again, there's the technical side of things of, looking at the data you're using, but also understanding, what parts of a sport are going to be captured best in data and things like that.
Okay, awesome. Glad to hear it. And before we dive deeper into the sports betting modeling, I want to remind everyone about BettingPros betting systems. BettingPros betting systems are designed to help you find winning trends and make smarter bets. Create and customize your system by sport, bet type, time frame, and more to find the most profitable betting opportunities for you. Follow systems to track profitability and tail upcoming bets. Our system track profitabilities for both the NFL and the NBA, as well as the MLB and college football. So download and use the Betting Pros app today to find the most profitable betting systems for you now. All right, and I want to get into building the foundations of your model here, Sam. What tools or software do you generally try to use when building your specific NFL betting model?
So it can be a wide range of things. Tend to use different coding languages, whether it's R or Python. Certainly possible to make a sports betting model in Excel as well. There are tons of resources out there that cover using both Excel or these different coding languages. Obviously there's another big aspect of things that is trending right now, which is AI, whether it's using something like ChatGPT or things like that. And I will say they are useful, but I would caution when you are using it. Don't just enter a prompt of build me an NFL sides and total model. Like it's not going to give you the results you need. You also need to know sort of what you're doing when you're asking these AI assistants for different help, because they might spit you wrong information and you need to be able to know when to sift through that.
Okay, so AI, I'm hearing coding. Is there anything that's free, more accessible to people that might not want to invest heavily into software like that quite yet? Is there anything simply you can do? Can you use Excel? Can you use different spreadsheets, things like that?
Yeah, you certainly can, and Excel has a solver add-on that I believe is free, and it'll create different regression models for you as well. You can do that. Again, I think Excel is good for some of those quote-unquote mental models, if you will, of just putting a lot of data into one place and using things that way. So there's a time and place for all of this for sure. And I think if you're not a coding expert or don't have a lot of experience, Excel is a good place to start.
We're kind of in this day and age today, Sam, where there's a ton of data coming at us left and right, man. How do we sort through all the BS and really filter that? Like how are you collecting it? How are you managing it? Is it a different software we're using, or is it just, hey, you got to put the time in it and really capture that data?
Yeah, like you said, we are in an age where data is more available than ever, and it takes a lot of work to understand what is out there and what's accurate and what you might need. Obviously looking in the right places. Google is a very helpful tool to figure out where all of that is. Again, I use a combination of both coding languages that I mentioned for my data cleaning. It just helps speed it up and make it more efficient. But again, Excel is a wonderful tool for that as well. I think it's the big part of it is just understanding the data that you're working with for sure.
Okay, and kind of on that same note of a lot of noise being out there right now, what are some common mistakes that people you think first make when building models? Is there data you think they're factoring that maybe they shouldn't be, or data maybe they're missing out on?
I think a big mistake, and one that I've learned a lot of lessons from, is assuming that the data that you're getting is correct.
Okay.
And understanding how different stats are calculated. Now, rushing yards, passing yards, like those are pretty cut and dry with how accurate they are. But I had some discussions with someone a couple of weeks ago about air yards in the NFL, which is the distance that the ball travels from the line of scrimmage to the catch point or target point. And a bunch of sites have a bunch of different numbers for that, depending on whether they include plays with penalties that don't actually count as a play or things like that. So doing some sense checking of your data is huge. Cleaning data in any model is going to be paramount. Most of your time, it's not super fun, but most of your time is going to be spent on on data collection and data cleaning. Again, no two sources are going to use the same nomenclature either.
Yeah.
I mean, if you try merging NFL team abbreviations, some have it as HOU for Houston, some have it as HST. So understanding reasons for that. And again, a big part of model building is if you put crap in, you're going to get crap out. So if the data you're putting in is not good, it's not accurate, the results of your model are not going to be good or accurate either.
Kind of sounds like eating fast food a little bit. When you're on the road, when you're traveling, sometimes you got to bite the bullet, maybe get a little McDinks in you, and might not feel great the next day. So I like that analogy from you there, Sam. Let's keep it moving here. But first, I want to give everyone a quick note that if you're looking to score a signed Amari Cooper jersey for free, courtesy of our friends over at pristineauction.com, all you got to do is head over to bettingpros.com/contest, complete the form, and either A, download the Betting Pros app, B, leave a review for the Betting Pros podcast, this podcast, or subscribe to our social media channels at Betting Pros on X and TikTok, or at Betting Pros NFL on Instagram. The more actions you complete, the more entries you will receive, and we'll be announcing the winner right here on the Betting Pros YouTube channel, so make sure you turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and claim your prize. All right, I want to get into more of the thick here, testing and tweaking your model, Sam. How do you test your model and gauge its accuracy? Are you kind of sending it all in and just, hey, week one, I got to see what I have here and pushing the chips in the middle, or are you just laying some small unit wagers to kind of test that off the rip?
Yeah, so there are a number of ways you can test a model. Obviously, back testing is a huge part of any sports betting model. You have your sort of classic model techniques. So for a classification model, accuracy, precision, things like that. For a regression model, you've got R squared, mean absolute error, all those sorts of things. You can search more about that. But another big part of a sports betting model is comparing it to historical odds. So comparing, past predictions or what your model would have predicted against the lines and see if it's a profitable model over a large enough sample. If your model predicts something at an 80% accuracy rate, but the sports book predicts it at 85%, it's not going to be beneficial to you.
Sure.
And it'll help you identify if you can overcome the VIG in certain markets. I think if you don't have past odds, some sports like the NFL have a litany of sports betting odds available for historical games, but some like the WNBA or smaller niche sports aren't as readily available. So if you don't have past odds, I think paper trading is a good way to do that. And what I mean by that is just writing down bets that your model would theoretically make in certain games and situations. Don't actually have to put a wager on it, and then track that. Once you get sort of a large enough sample, I would say, depending on the market, probably at least 100 bets, I think, is a good sample. Then you can understand, again, if you truly have an edge in that market with the model you're betting. So again, it's not fun because if your model wins all 100 bets, it's not ideal, but you want to make sure before you get super deep into risking a ton of units to confirm that your model has a bit of an edge.
I like that. Kind of putting your toes in the water, testing it out before you go full send on it. I like that idea. Sam, especially in the NFL, things are getting a little wacky at times. I mean, we just saw the Hall of Fame game end in the third quarter due to weather a couple weeks ago. How do you account for just crazy variables, unexpected things happening here in the world of NFL gambling?
Yeah, this is part of the handicapping process, right? It's understanding what parts of a market or projection your model doesn't account for. I know we're talking about the NFL here, but to borrow an example from some of the Formula One modeling I was doing, each between races, cars can make certain upgrades, and that's not, sure, you could go back and collect a lot of that data. It's not readily available, but that's not necessarily a feature that you might want to include in a model or know how to code into a model. So your projection might have a certain driver or team better than expected, but maybe they also made an upgrade to their car, something like that. In the NFL, maybe it's weather, maybe it's the team made a change of who the play caller is. In understanding, again, your model's not necessarily going to capture that, but understanding what impact that might have on the output of your model. And I think, again, that's the part of the art of sports betting is understanding what goes into your model, what's captured, and then taking the other things and applying it in the handicapping process.
Yeah, it's funny in F1 you can't account for some drivers who just don't want to win the race and have to pit because their team is yelling at them, just like we saw a couple weeks ago with Lando Norris and that squad over there. Some final tips here for the sports gamblers out there, Sam. How do you update your model, or how often do you update your model based on new data and trends, and how do you best spot those trends as well throughout the NFL season, which, again, there's things coming at us left and right, things are changing, so do you have time to kind of go back and tweak that throughout, or is it like, hey, by week one, if my model isn't set, I just kind of have to roll with it?
Yeah, I think between seasons for sports is sort of a good benchmark for updating and retraining a model. It sort of depends on the sport too. With the NFL this season, we're going to see a different type of kickoff. And while that may not have a massive impact, it's going to have some impact on, different models depending on, again, what you're projecting. But I think, again, understanding, again, what your model is capturing. Like if you're not simulating play-by-play for the NFL and simulating the kickoff specifically, like you need to understand how that works. I think it's also important not only like how often you set it up, but the way that you set it up. When you're going through the initial build of a model, setting it up so that the code or the process is done in a way that it's simple to retrain it. You don't want to have to start from scratch every single time. You want to retrain it. You want to properly label all the data that you're working with and things like that, so it's not a huge burden to retrain it.
And what advice would you give to someone, Sam, who's just kind of starting out here in sports betting modeling? Is there any do's and do nots you have kind of right off the top of the dome?
I would say it's going to be a trial and error process, sort of seeing what works. I think there is some debate as to whether it's better to focus on a sport that or not, because if you're familiar with the NFL, you're going to have some inherent biases on, again, what you think should be included in a model or what shouldn't, and letting the data speak to you is a huge part of that. But it also will help you spot potential errors in the data that you're working with. So there's a little bit of a balance there. I think understanding too that projections are just projections. Like that's it. They're not picks per se. It takes more than that. I know I've mentioned this a bunch of times, but I would never advocate for taking your projections or someone else's projections and just blindly betting them by comparing them to whatever the sportsbook's lines are. There are, you're not going to be able to capture everything in a sports betting model that the market in a sports bet is going to capture as well. So you can use those projections as sort of a guiding light into where things might be going, and then again use the handicapping of understanding what's not in your model to figure out if what you aren't capturing is enough to sort of overcome the vig, if you will. And then I think lastly, using simulations, you create sort of expected value of a bet using that. I think that's super important to track, and making sure that you're really on the right track and provides you sort of a range of outcomes for the specific bet you're going to make.
Awesome. I appreciate that advice. I'm sure the great folks here at BettingPros will as well. Last question I want to leave you with: what communities or other resources can you recommend for people who are just kind of getting into the sports betting modeling world?
There are a couple of things. I think one underrated aspect is like reading scholarly papers. And I know this isn't college. This isn't, it's not necessarily a fun part, but there are a ton of published papers out there on different sports topics, even if they're not betting related, that will give you a sense of what has or hasn't worked for other groups and give you maybe a starting point too, or a different way of thinking about approaching a specific problem. Again, I mentioned ChatGPT or AI earlier as, being a little bit wary of it, but it is a useful tool for helping with automation and things like that. I'm in the Betting Pros Discord and on Twitter as well. Like, feel free to reach out to me and ask questions of people. Like, it's daunting because there's a lot, and some people are not necessarily willing to share everything. So asking the right questions is important, because if someone has an edge with a sports betting model, they're likely not going to be sharing it because they want to keep that edge to themselves. But if you can ask questions about, feature engineering or things like that, and don't ask, hey, can you build me a model, or hey, can you give me your output? Those are the sorts of questions you want to avoid. But have questions that'll help lead you to water so that you can further build your model out.
Well, we appreciate you leading us to water here today, Sam, and that's going to be all for us. So we hope everyone got a solid foundation into sports betting modeling in this video. He's the scientist at Sam Hoppen on Twitter. I'm Seth Woolcock at _Seth FF on Twitter. I'm just here so I don't get fined. Thanks for watching, y'all. We'll catch you next time.